Martina, non so se c'è anche Francesca online, però io adesso farò il live
No,
Facebook. Voi se volete potete mi
sì,
dispiace per questa cosa del cross posting, ma non mi sono sentita di farlo per questioni proprio di sicurezza perché abbiamo avuto problemi e quindi
perfetto.
finché non sono sicura che funziona non lo faccio.
No, non c'è problema, assolutamente. Aspettiamo il post e condividiamo il tuo post.
Esatto, adesso appena lo metto. Io tra l'altro appunto
Posso chiederti una cosa? Quando dici che fai foto, intendi lo screenshot?
è carino per
Sì,
forza.
sì, ok, no,
Puoi
perché
farle
anche
anche tu,
io pensavo di farlo,
ovviamente.
quindi ce li scambiamo dopo.
Assolutamente, fai tranquilla, perché io
Ok.
ovviamente dovendo aiutare per le PowerPoint non posso fare nulla in
No,
termini di
esatto, quindi dimmi
social.
anche tu come posso aiutarti in
No,
caso.
tu vai social così io poi faccio share. Florence, ti dispiace darmi l'host per poter far partire un attimo e poi io ti do il cost. Just one other information. I want to share with you, perhaps Maria will do it later, also the hashtag World Refugee Day and World Refugee Day 2020. So if you want to use it, if you want to share news, please use the same hashtag. And Maria will tell us again. So Florence, I think we can start. Florence, can you give me the host for 2 minutes? No, don't worry, tranquila. I think Maria, you have the flow.
Thank you, Patrizia, for going over all of the technical details. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Good. So thank you to everyone for joining us for World Refugee Day under very different circumstances this year to honor the strength and courage of refugees and migrants around the world. We have many...
Are you in?
What? We have many time zones represented, so good morning to some and good afternoon and evening to others. My name is Maria Mancinelli and I work here in Rome at the Jesuit Refugee Services International Office, which is very close to the International Union Superiors General, who we're very happy to be partnering with for this online event. So today we will take a deeper look at forced displacement around the world and the impact of COVID-19 on our refugee brothers and sisters. This past week, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees released their annual Global Trends report. Forced displacement stands at nearly 80 million people worldwide, up by almost 9 million from the previous year. And of this 80 million, over half are internally displaced. This is clearly a long-term phenomenon, and it should be noted that the precariousness, marginalization, and rejection that refugees and migrants are currently facing is not new, but has been exacerbated by COVID-19. So 80 million people, this is an overwhelming number, but as this already radically vulnerable group faces even more uncertainty, we are encouraged by Pope Francis to know in order to understand. And as stated in his 2020 World Day of Migrants and Refugee message, it is not about statistics, it is about real people. If we encounter them, we will get to know more about them, and knowing their stories, we will be able to understand them. Today, our wonderful speakers from different parts of the world will share experiences of being close and serving migrants and refugees, helping us wrap our heads and hearts around the larger numbers that are associated with the refugee reality. So before we get started, another quick logistical note. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. So if you do have questions, please wait to ask. Don't unmute yourself, but feel free to already post them in the chat. And as Patrizia mentioned, you can use the hashtag World Refugee Day, World Refugee Day 2020. We can also post it in the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Carolina Gottardo, who is the director of the Jesuit Refugee Service Australia. Carolina is a migrant lawyer and economist specializing in migration, asylum, and gender, and has worked on human rights issues for more than 20 years in different parts of the world. She is also the chair of the Women, Gender, and Diversity Group and focal point on the Global Compact for Migration at the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. Carolina is a member of the UN Women's Global Expert Working Group on Women and Migration and part of the board of the International Detention Coalition and the Global Coalition for Migration. So Carolina, the screen is all yours.
Thank
Carolina, you have to unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Ah, okay, sorry. So I was saying good morning and buenos dias, bonjour, buongiorno, good afternoon for some others in different parts of the world. Thank you so much to JRS International and to UISG for inviting me to participate in this very, very relevant and important event for World Refugee Day 2020. And this is at a time that really has been challenging in every corner of our globe, and particularly challenging for refugees, for people seeking asylum, internally displaced people, and migrants in vulnerable situations. So I would like to start with one of those powerful quotes from Pope Francis. He has many powerful quotes, and is that the precariousness that we have come to experience is a constant in the lives of displaced people. And if we think about that sentence, how true it is, and how many people it touches. Because if we think about refugees and migrants, they are people who have already been marginalized before the COVID-19 crisis and who have had quite precarious lives before. So think about, for instance, detention centers or a refugee camp, or think about the limbo and the time waiting, or those in kind of urban settings that are struggling to make ends meet and without a safe migration status. Really, most of them have their human rights breached and are not treated with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. So the problems experienced by refugees, migrants, people seeking protection, internally displaced people, really predate the COVID-19 pandemic. It's just that they have been intensified, they have been enhanced. And many of them are affected by the kind of health crisis itself, by the lockdowns, or by the government policies. So really what we have is that COVID-19 has become a crisis of protection. And this crisis of protection is disproportionately affecting this population of people on the move and refugees. We have to think that that uncertainty, that kind of difficulty to predict the future, that fear, that we all somehow have come to experience, all of us, through this time of COVID-19, was a constant in the lives of these people. And this is exactly what Pope Francis is trying to tell us. But this is only part of the equation. And I want to also highlight the other part of the equation, the positive part of the equation. And this is about the leadership, the resilience, the agency of refugees, of people seeking protection. Because in reality, they contribute so much to our societies, they have so much to offer, and they are so willing to integrate. And we cannot forget that leadership, that agency, and that resilience, because that's really at the heart of the people that we work with or that we serve at JRS and many other organizations. I always like to keep that positive side always in mind. Let me start with the global situation. So COVID-19 really has hit hard on this population. And let's think how. And there are so many multiple and complex ways. So for instance, the situations of refugees and migrants in detention centers is really challenging. How would you socially distance in a detention center? For instance, think about the situation in Malaysia, where there have been raids and where thousands of people have been put in detention centers, where there are already so many COVID cases. and or think about the situation in Mexico and in many other places. Really, this has been a very, very complex time for people in detention centers, in migration detention centers. What about refugee camps? If you think about, for instance, one of the biggest camps in the world in Cox's Bazar and the situation there and the fact that there are people that are COVID positive, that is impossible to socially distance. And if you think that we're thinking about 1 square kilometer for 90,000 people, that gives us some sort of perspective into the situation that we're facing. Then there is the erosion of the right to seek asylum. And we're seeing that in many countries, with borders closed and with many, many countries using the pandemic as an excuse to come up with stronger migration policies and to actually erode that right to seek asylum. I mean, a good example is the United States and what is happening there, but this is happening in many other places around the world. Think about returns and the whole issue of deportations and the threats to the principle of non-refoulement. The dire situation that we're seeing of so many people being returned to Central America from the US, being COVID positive, the situation of boats drifting in the ocean with Rohingya refugees that have not been allowed to disembark, with many people have died, and there's so many that have been returned, for instance, from Malaysia into Bangladesh, also COVID positive. Think about the others that have had to return because they didn't have any choice or any chance, like so many Venezuelans returning from Colombia, and those that are internally struggling, like the tragic situation in India, and the thousands and thousands of migrants that are internal migrants that are returning to their villages. This is another very, very pressing issue. There is also the issue of the exclusion of refugees and migrants from access to a minimum safety net that they need for their survival. And unfortunately, in places where there is a safety net, because that's not all over the world, we have seen that that exclusion, that what it's doing is that it's enhancing the already existing gap or bridge in between citizens and residents and those who are not. People seeking asylum, migrants, refugees, and the terrible situations that they are finding themselves in as a result of the COVID crisis and being completely excluded. This is happening here in Australia, it's happening in other countries around Europe and in many places around the world. The casual sector, the role of the casual sector, and thinking about the refugees and the people seeking asylum working in the informal economy. Those were the jobs that were very hardly hit. So many people lost their jobs, cannot get by. There are those lockdowns, and what we see.
Carolina,
Yes?
can you just slow down a little bit for the interpreters?
Of course. Sorry. I'll slow down. So I was speaking about the situation in the informal sector and the people who have lost their jobs as a result of COVID-19, the migrants and the refugees that have lost their jobs and that are struggling, because in reality, this was their only way of survival. And now they are struggling to have enough food for their tables or to really get by with basic survival needs. And that again is a massive effect from the COVID-19 crisis. Another point is sadly the growing xenophobia, this kind of fear of the stranger that it has been enhanced by the pandemic. Again, a very sad example is the situation in Malaysia, where there was this big backlash against Rohingya refugees that led to raids and led to massive detentions. In Singapore as well, and kind of the blame on migrants for the second wave of the virus. And also, really in reality, a lot of racist abuse targeted towards Asians as if they were kind of spreading the virus. We have seen this in many, many parts of the world. I think it's also important to highlight the specific situation of women affected by the pandemic, because refugee women, migrant women, asylum seeking women are affected in different ways. So they are really disproportionate. They have a high proportion of the informal sector, and they are in many of those industries that were affected by the pandemic. But also they have caring responsibilities. That means that getting back into work is going to be harder for so many. And it's also the issue of sexual and gender-based violence. So we have seen so many refugees and migrants that are now living 24/7 with the perpetrator, with no way of accessing support or to get any help, and to kind of escape that situation, and very difficult for them to access services. And this is very worrying. For instance, here in Sydney, we already had a case of a migrant woman killed in a situation of domestic violence during the lockdowns. And this has happened again all over the world. This, as you can see, thinking about detention, return, xenophobia, erosion of the right to seek asylum, exclusion of refugees and migrants, these are massive effects of the COVID-19 crisis. But the situation also has had some sort of positive sides to it. And one is that refugees, migrants, and the community as a whole around the world are trying to respond to this pandemic in a very resilient way. And this covers JRS, and it covers many religious congregations and many other non-religious organizations. There also seems to be this growing recognition of the vital or crucial roles that refugees and migrants play in our economies and society. So for instance, many are essential workers in sectors such as healthcare or care, or part of the food supply chain or the cleaning industries. And so there have been some sort of recognition there, but they are engaged in work that has been normally underpaid and undervalued, and this hasn't changed through the pandemic. Another positive has been some regularization schemes that have happened in countries in Europe, for instance. So for instance, temporary regularization schemes in Portugal that have included many refugees and migrants, and also in Italy. These are transitory, but are positives within a crisis, and are important to highlight. In reality, there has been more precariousness and more exclusion than anything. And the pandemic continues getting hold of our world. The economies are heading for a looming crisis. We also have collapsing public support systems, a fall in remittances, food crisis, etc. And we need to make sure also we have the global climate crisis that we cannot forget, and that it all obviously interacts with the pandemic. So we need to make sure that this crisis in protection doesn't become the permanent. And our response is part of that to ensure a better post-COVID world. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our situation here in Australia. So you can see how we are responding and what is happening here. And I think that starting with stories is a powerful way to start. So I'm going to tell you the case of Niraj, that came to Australia as an asylum seeker in 2019 and sought protection. And you will be familiar that we had these massive bushfires that affected the whole of Australia in our summer last year, like the whole of the end of the year and beginning of this year. And Niraj was one of those volunteering in the bushfire response in one of the centers. He was cooking, he was serving meals to people that were here in Australia displaced by the fires. He managed to get a job in January at a restaurant, and in March, as a result of the COVID crisis, he lost this job, and he was told that the restaurant wouldn't be opening. At that point, he had $40 in savings, and his rent was $350. Negotiations with his landlord completely failed, and it meant that he was with absolutely nothing and not even money to secure food. So at JRS, we have been helping with some emergency relief and with food, but unfortunately his mental health has been declining, and his situation is the same of many others. We also have Layla. She's an asylum seeker, survivor of domestic violence, 2 children, also lost her job. Also, and for her, we had helped her to get a job back in 2017, and it was so hard to get into that point. And now, after all this time, she has lost the job, and they have nothing to live on. And for us, we have seen so many people like them affected by COVID. So many people losing their jobs, and unfortunately, the Australian government completely excluding people seeking asylum and migrants in vulnerable situations from the COVID response. So a very, very generous support package for citizens and residents, excellent really, and a zero, absolute zero for people seeking protection and migrants. So the demand for an organization like JRS for our services has increased by 224%, which is a staggering number. And we still have like 170 people in our intake box, and we have triple our emergency relief budget, and even like that, it's hard to respond. Food security is a major issue. So as I say, no, people don't have absolutely anything to eat. So we are currently delivering food to more than 750 people on a weekly basis, which is enormous. And this has been an enormous logistical operation because we are pre-packing the food with the help of volunteers at our center. And we have been doing it for 11 weeks, around 11 weeks, with the help of staff and volunteers as drivers, dispatchers, packers. We have 9 collection points across Sydney. I'm going to start sharing my screen so you could see some photos. I don't know if you can see it now.
Yes, it's perfect.
Good. So, I mean, this is part of our food efforts. We have also seen a spike in anxiety, in depression, and in suicidality, unfortunately, for many of the people that we serve. Because many people, yes, they are in this very limbo situation with nothing to get by. And also some of them cannot access the health system and are worried about any fees from hospitals, etc. Also an increased number of women that are talking about domestic violence, are reporting it. And as I said before, for us, it means very hard to access services. It was hard before, it's much harder even now, and they are trapped 24/7 in these kind of dangerous situations. The situation for staff and volunteers has also been difficult because they had invested so many months and years supporting some people to try to get some independence. And now there is like being back to square one when people are again depending on charity. We also had around 90 volunteers at JRS, and we like temporarily lost most of them because either they were over 70 or they had health conditions. So we had to recruit new volunteers. We recruited 65 new in a matter of days and weeks to try to put in these completely new operations. And we continue with our casework, and we haven't stopped the individual appointments, especially for those most affected, but we are doing most of the casework virtually. So as an organization, we have been resilient, definitely, and we have upscaled our services, but it's very important to clarify that this is a systemic issue. And JRS and other organizations cannot sort what is a systemic issue. Therefore, we have put a lot of effort in our advocacy, because this needs systemic change. So for instance, what we have done is that we have been trying to influence decision makers at the federal and at the state level. I'm trying to change it to the next one. I'll show you more on this. So yeah, this one. So we have tried to influence those levels. And what it means, for instance, with the Archdiocese of Sydney, we convene a group of 45 Catholic leaders writing to the Prime Minister and to other decision makers, talking about this absence of a safety net. We also launch a Catholic petition and are part of the Nobody Left Behind campaign, produce a discussion paper on the effects of COVID on people seeking protection, and have been very, very active on media in different ways. Some of this has paid off. At the state level, there have been some measures announced recently, but nothing at the federal level. And people are still left with all the support packages from the Australian government. So just to finish, this exclusion has been devastating for people. But the other side of this story is the amazing support from the community. So I want to describe to you some of these pictures, because if you see that picture of the aisle, that's some of the food packing that we do every week for the 750 people. This is some of the food we get from amazing donations. Some of it we have to buy. The picture on the top right is a trailer that was even hard to unpack because it was so much. It's incredible. If you see here, these are our, in the middle of this picture is our collection points, and in the top right, you can see some of the message of gratitude from the people that we serve. We also got donations of toilet paper that you can see down. So really amazing community support. I'm going to tell you just two stories, very quick stories. The first one is about the sisters from religious congregations. So some of them are helping us with the canteen rice, sugar, dividing the food, and are there so frequently. And some of the sisters congregations have decided to donate the pension contribution they had from the government to JRS without us asking. And that was really, really touching. And then if you see this picture on the far left, this little girl, that was a Muslim family that spent $7,000 in food, and they came to pack during Ramadan while they were fasting for all the other families that didn't have anything. And that was amazing interreligious collaboration and a very, very touching gesture. And there are so many stories like this, but I'm not, I mean, we don't have time, but I just wanted to share those with you. Just to finish, I wanted to finish the way I started, and is to go back to Pope Francis. So I would like to draw attention to his message on World Refugee Day that clearly reminds us that when we're talking about refugees and migrants, including the internally displaced, we're not talking about numbers or statistics lost somewhere. We're talking about people with stories, and we're talking about that human side, that human element, and that really, really is what matters. He has also asked us repeatedly to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate refugees and migrants. And that means that he also asks us to learn to share, ensuring that we all grow together and that we leave absolutely no one behind. And that is a very important message. He points out that through the COVID pandemic, that reminds us that we are all in this together. He says we're in the same boat, and we need to listen to the plea of vulnerable people, to the displaced, and to our very ill planet, our planet Earth. And I think this is an invitation that we need to listen to if we really want to make a difference. So thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to have been here.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Thank you for your incredible work and for giving us an overview of what's going on globally and then in Australia, and also, most importantly, telling us about some good in this very awful situation. So thank you. So I will go to our next speaker, who is Sister Carmen Elisa Bandeo of the Missionary Sisters Servants of the Holy Spirit. Sister Carmen is originally from Argentina and has as the coordinator of the Jesuit Refugee Services education project Magistores in Greece since November 2018. She has previously taught youth in Argentina and has counseled undocumented migrant workers and victims of human trafficking in Taiwan. In Rome, she served as mission secretary for her congregation and an active member of the USG Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Group. She is also a member of the UISG Intercongregational Project in Sicily and worked at Centro Astali's semi-autonomy project, volunteering at their Rupe Center with the families and children. So you can unmute yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
Muy bien, gracias. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for your invitation to share here my message with all of you today. And secondly, I would like to tell you about my community in Greece. Well, Kalimera. So my presentation is quite simple. First of all, I would like to share who we are. So we are a community of the missionary sisters, servants of the Holy Spirit. And this is a project of my province that started in 2016 and that ended in, kept on working in 2017. We want to be present as missionary sister servants of the Holy Spirit, and we want to show our compassion and mercy towards refugees. We want to be an open home for all those working with refugees and for asylum seekers. And until March, there were 5 sisters. Our JRS Greece originated in November 2015, and we tried to give a helping hand during the crisis. And the services we offered were performed by the permanent staff and by a group of volunteers. And some of the sisters are part of the volunteers. We are setting up a project for integration, providing support to teenagers, children, refugees, migrants on the Greek territory, and especially school kids.
Carmen, perdón. Tiene que abrir tu micro. Perdón. Lo cerré yo por... Perdón.
Bueno, ¿desde dónde vuelvo? No sé en qué parte.
I don't know where we left here before I got interrupted, but I was introducing my community. And I was also presenting 2 projects that we are promoting at JRS. So, a social integration center where we are providing support to children and teenagers of migrants and refugees, and we're taking care of their families. I am the coordinator of this project, not of the JRS Greece, and our objective within this project is the promotion of the integration through an informal education program in Greek or in other languages, English, French, or how to create a CV, for example, both for young people and adults. We're also promoting activities for kids like arts, games, English, and other subjects. Another project is a daily center for women, for women refugees, providing health care, and providing them also the opportunity to take a shower from then to then. And then we can also teach them Greek, or they can also have access to a shop where they can buy some food or household items. And then we also have another project where migrant kids can play, can exchange their experiences. 2 days are devoted to male and to women. And then we always provide also advice about health, and we also resort to plants and to natural remedies. And sometimes these people, they feel connected with the practices they used to have in their regional countries. We're also working with other institutions like Caritas or other organizations like the Missionary Sisters Charity, or we provide aid to drug addicts or members of UNHCR or members of the civil society. So we are providing a contribution to people who are experiencing very difficult situations. So we created a personal community of volunteers where we integrated also migrants and refugees, and together we are carrying forward our work. what's the general situation in Greece? And due to the government's policy, they announced some refugee center where they're welcoming refugees and part of the and different migrants, and they are also benefiting from EU funds and funds provided by the UNHCR, but many people had to leave their houses and they had to move to a refugee house on some Greek islands. Right now, there's no conditions for a smooth transition. Right now, the difficulty of the situation was exacerbated by the pandemic, and we are going back to the crisis that Greece had in 2015 and 2017. Tensions and violence we experienced due to the situation also with the Turkish government and the pushback situation on the borders and the arrivals of new migrants to Greek islands are some of the problems that Greece is experiencing. I don't want to deepen the consequences that this crisis brought about, but it's a crisis that is affecting not only Greece, but the whole of the European Union. The sisters meet on a daily basis people who are suffering from these consequences. They have dreams, hopes, like everybody else. And during the forced quarantine brought about by COVID-19, many services were locked down and restrictions on displacement were imposed. This
Perdona la molestia, tiene que mover el micro fuera de tu camiseta. Tienes que tenerlo así porque se...
Carmen, you should move the microphone because we cannot hear you very well. Thank you very much. Now it's better. Also for the translators, by the way. So what I was saying that during the forced quarantine, many houses, many centers had to be locked down. People experience confinement in camps. There were restrictions about the way people were moving, and this is not the same as a house with a garden, with water, with electricity. So camps only had limited access. They had no rubbish containers. They no internet connection. They no water. So many of our people were living on streets. The essential services were still running and open, like hospitals, supermarkets, and pharmacies. All the ONGs institutions were forced to close their doors and they had to reinvent their presence and to support the most needy people. Some others had to close their doors and they had to wait and they had to provide telephone assistance. Many of the refugees and of the asylum seekers rely upon the use of the credit card so they could withdraw some cash, but some others weren't able to use this credit cards for different reasons. So, for example, because the government didn't deposit the money, they couldn't find cash desks or ATMs, so people couldn't access basic food. One of the first measures the government implemented in a very swift way was one of the factors that contributed to having a very low number of cases in Greece. That is to say, it was the closing down of schools. So they started a cycle of school classes where teachers and other managing staff took part in. And they also highlighted some social discrepancies and differences in Greek society. That is to say, the difficulty to access these classes on the part of kids, of refugee and migrants who couldn't access these classes either because they didn't have electricity, internet, or because they only had one smartphone in their family. And then we would like to highlight the fact that also Greek kids and of lower of poor working classes or kids of migrants have this problem too. As far as health and food are concerned, ONGs were very creative in their ways of finding solutions in order to make up for these shortcomings. As far as the number of refugees are concerned, the number is not very of affected people wasn't very high. The UNHCR and the UN offer their help to these people. And then I would like to highlight a situation within a Greek society, which is not described very much. So in Athens, there are a lot of homeless people, and among them, there are some drug addicts. They are Greek, but they're also refugees and migrants, and they all share a sad experience, so this is to say, drug addiction and its consequences. There's an illegal drug market of very cheap and therefore dangerous drugs where young migrants and refugees fall prey to the victim of these drugs. Many of them are using these drugs and many of them are migrants. So we can say that the precariousness of refugees before COVID-19 in camps and also in residential areas increased. And all the situation before COVID-19 brought about some marginalization problems, but also highlighted how we could help them in their own way, providing them their own contribution and trying to also use the rules imposed by the Greek government. So we continued supporting people who were seeking for assistance over the telephone. So we published over our Facebook page some materials so that kids and students could keep on studying. As soon as the situation will go back to normal, we will open our doors again for food distribution, and we will open our daily center for women and kids so that they can continue their workshops and then can wash do their laundry. And then we hope they'll be able to provide other classes soon too. Some physical projects were replaced by other projects or by more concrete examples like food delivery for the neediest. The most affected group was the group of children, because they couldn't access some activities and they couldn't access schools anymore. These were settings where they were allowed to be kids, and now they are limited in their access. So we need to find some creative approaches to meet children again in parks and places, and give them maybe also toys. Within the facility where we are performing our activities, we'll have more time to listen to their stories. We improved our quality time, the time we spend with them. We have having deeper and deeper relations, they are allowing us to be part of their world. And I would like to share 2 pictures. When they asked me if I could share some pictures, so well, I picked these 2 pictures. They share a common element. We are all around, we're sitting around a table. The first one was in the kitchen of the volunteers of the JRS, and the second one is within our own community. In some, we are with our sisters of the refugees and volunteers, and they represent my experience in Greece. And like a volunteer said, the kitchen is a welcoming place, it invites us to share, and I think that this project has given me the opportunity to share my experiences. Sometimes we think that refugees and asylum seekers can be helped through heroic deeds we see on TVs or we read about in newspapers. These are very necessary and they're important, but life is full of small daily gestures that make us feel human. A smile, or answering 100 times the same question, healing a wound, and always with a smile on our face. Provide care to a little girl, for example, cut her finger. Or we can also provide advice. We can listen to their opinions, to their feedback about their ideas, or we have to warn them about something they did wrong, or we have to fix some mistakes. So this proximity allows us to listen to them with all their hopes. And it's on a daily basis that we can build life and we can give them back their dignity as persons. A dignity that they lost on the way, and a dignity that will be able to give them safety. Many of them don't want to be called refugees because it's women and men with concrete stories and with a dream they would like to fulfill. At the beginning, of my voluntary work, I thought that this was very important, that it mattered, that my presence was able to give them hope. In Athens, I realized that hope was in their hearts and is in their hearts, and I'm just accompanying them on the way. I'm just supporting them. It's like their hope is a fire and I providing some wood to keep the fire burning. So if we want to keep hope, then I'll have to listen to their voices and to advocacy and international advocacy. As a religious community, our life is a constant liturgy, and we are giving in God's hands their lives and our lives, sometimes also the lack of power we have. And God is always sending us back to them. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Thank you very much. We'll be relying upon your support and prayer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Carmen. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of how you are giving back dignity to refugees and migrants. And then you said it at the end. So thank you, and thank you to the sisters who are working alongside you and for these small daily gestures. Okay, so I am honored to introduce our next speaker, Taban Patrick Consentino, who is a former South Sudanese refugee Jesuit. He was born in South Sudan, but raised in Uganda, where he lived for 19 years. He is one of the beneficiaries of the Jesuit Refugee Service. After the completion of his high school education, he was inspired by the Jesuits working with JRS to become a Jesuit. He passed through stages of formation in Tanzania, India, Ethiopia, Kenya, and he is now in Italy to complete his studies in social sciences. He was recently appointed to the Jesuit Refugee Services Administrative Council. He is passionate about social justice and education and dedicates his vocation to advocating for the rights of the marginalized. Over to you, Taban.
Thank you so much, Maria Manginelli, for the word of introduction. And I thank you all for joining. I would like to share with you my story as a former refugee, how my childhood worldview was, how education became a priority to me, and how I ended up becoming a Jesuit. I will also reflect on Pope Francis' message on World Refugee Day and end it with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on my refugee brothers and sisters. My name is Taban Patrick Constantino. I was born in South Sudan in 1987. I grew up in the Maguru refugee settlement camp at Jumani, Uganda. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My parents and siblings got repatriated to South Sudan in 2008. Again, were forced to leave in 2016. Presently, they live in different refugee camps in Uganda. The name Taban is an Arabic word meaning tired. The name was given to me in the light of the experiences of war, and it also reflects the subsequent experiences of the refugee camps. I have lived and heard many stories of what it means to grow up as a refugee. Being tired is one way of looking at it. For me, it is important to explore other perspectives in order to highlight not only the negative aspects of the experience, but also the possibility of rising above the difficulties and bitterness. My worldview growing up in a refugee camp was full of negativity, helplessness, hunger, thirst, nakedness, loneliness, hatred, and so forth. But at some point, I began to see that even though I had found myself in an undesirable situation, I was not condemned to it. With time, hope increased as I began to recognize the blessings and the opportunities that were present, even in that situation. I often recall the moments of lacking sufficient food, clothing, and other basic needs. Now, when I see children growing up in similar situations, I cannot hold back wanting to listen to them and offering whatever I can to assist them. Having been there myself, I connect easily with their experience of lack and helplessness. In the refugee camp, what seemed to matter most were the immediate needs, and for me, education was not one of them. It was my mother who taught me to see education as a priority. When I was 7, she took me to a nursery school. On the first day of my experience, I was shocked. I sang and was given porridge with sugar for breakfast. But this never made sense to me. The following day, I told my mom that I didn't want to go to nursery school. Then she took me to the primary section, where I did not need a certificate for admission. The qualification was simply to put my right hand over my head and touch my left ear. I failed the test, but got admitted anyway. There were no classrooms, I attended classes under the shade of trees and wrote on the ground. It still never made sense to me. So I asked my mother to sit with me while attending classes, or else I would return home with her. The childhood drama continued until one day, my mother surprised me with a question that changed my life forever. She asked me, "My son, what do you want in life?" I replied, "Mom, I want you to buy me a dog, a radio cassette, and a motorcycle." She looked at me and smiled and said, "Son, I'll buy you a dog and a radio cassette." Partially happy, I asked her, "What about the motorcycle?" She replied, "You will buy the motorcycle." I was surprised and asked, "How can I buy the motorcycle when I am only a child?" Then she replied, "You will be able to buy it only if you go to school." Then the following day, she fulfilled her promise and bought me a dog and a radio cassette, and then taught me to fulfill my part by going to school. Later on, I became passionate about schooling. I worked so hard to perform well in school with the aim of buying a motorcycle. My mother saw and taught me the importance of education in breaking the cycle of poverty and realizing one's dreams. My Jesuit priestly vocation journey began when I got introduced to a Catholic faith in the camp. After my baptism, I took an active role as an altar boy and a member of the choir. This experience introduced me to the Jesuits that worked with the Jesuit Refugee Service and offered pastoral services to the refugees. Their ministry and example sparked my desire to become a priest. Later, I joined the Mena Seminary. When I completed my ordinary level, I was privileged to get support from the GRS to complete my advanced level studies, during which I worked with them. It was through this experience that I saw how refugees were suffering and how the GRS were supporting them to attain education and become self-reliant. I began to consider the Jesuit life as a possible way to make an impact in the lives of others. I joined the Jesuits in 2010, and the formation journey has taken me so far to Tanzania, India, Ethiopia, Kenya, and now Italy, where I am doing licentiate studies in social sciences. It is hard for refugee children to emerge in this kind of journey, and many of them, for lack of support, are stuck in the cycle of poverty and despair. But the good news is that I can do one thing. I can be a blessing through advocacy, joining an event, supporting refugees' own businesses, prayers, and donations. I can get involved with what GRS does in transforming the lives of many refugees as they accompany and serve them and advocate for their rights. The GRS has been a big part of my story and many other stories like it. I am encouraged by the message of His Holiness Pope Francis for the World Refugee Day. The Pope advocates for the welcoming, protection, promotion, and integration of migrants, refugees, and displaced people. He also shows how these efforts can be improved in practical actions. He talks about the need to know in order to understand, to be close in order to serve, to listen in order to be reconciled, to share in order to grow, to be involved in order to promote, and to cooperate in order to build. This message has made me think through my experiences as a former refugee and to reflect on the impact that these actions can make in life. I will offer a reflection on 3 of the practical actions offered by the Pope. As a result of the war in South Sudan, I was uprooted and planted in a situation of dire poverty and desperation, where I had to face fear, uncertainty, hunger, nakedness, helplessness, and hopelessness. At some point in my journey, I felt, as Pope Francis puts it, welcomed, protected, promoted, and integrated. And I can think of the concrete actions that translated into these experiences. To be close in order to serve. Meaningful service requires closeness. My experience working with GRS reflects this concretely. I have learned how important it is to get close to the refugees by being immersed in their context in order to have a first-hand experience of what their needs are and to offer a far-reaching response. To listen in order to be reconciled. One thing I take close to heart is listening. For one who is vulnerable to the sense that another person pays attention to his or her story can have a transforming effect. I experienced this too. It was through this experience that I began to recognize opportunities around me and continue to grow in confidence and hope that I needed, not only to pursue my own dreams, but also to see how my aspirations are connected with those of other people. To be involved in order to promote. As a Jesuit information, I worked with the GRS in South Sudan. I shared my story with the students to encourage them to remain optimistic and to make education a priority. Moreover, I used my pocket money to pay school fees and buy uniforms for some children who were in extreme need. Involvement in the life of the vulnerable is always a blessing. Getting involved directly sends a message to these people that they are not forgotten, and it keeps me aware of them and their situations wherever I am. When I think of my time as a refugee, I cannot help but wonder how the refugees living in the camps are coping in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Before the lockdown, my refugee brothers and sisters worldwide were already in quarantine without free movement. Now the difficulties of restrictions are worse for them. To be a refugee is to be almost completely dependent on others. With no garden to cultivate, refugees have to depend on monthly ration from the NGOs. I think of their daily routine, like the collection of firewood, fetching of water, looking for food, running small businesses. Usually, refugees walk several miles from one settlement camp to the other to trace their missing family members and visit them. The lockdown has put all this on hold. When I think of social distancing, I imagine what that means for a family of 10 people living in one tent. When I think of maintaining hygiene, I wonder how that is possible when there is a shortage of water, even for drinking. When I hear about a lockdown, I think about parents that need to look for daily bread for their children. Then there is also the problem of schools that are closed down without a possibility of virtual learning. What can I do in this state of emergency? The pandemic has definitely complicated further the problems of refugees. This can be in terms of children getting malnourished and sick, unwanted pregnancies among young schoolgirls, school dropouts, depression, fear, hopelessness, and even loss of lives. I can do one thing to encourage hope amid all these threats. I can do one thing to be a blessing in the lives of my refugee brothers and sisters. I feel encouraged by Pope Francis' call for practical actions, and I am determined to continue to seek ways to make the message a reality wherever I find myself. Thank you for listening to my story and reflections. Happy World Refugee Day.
Taban, thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey with us and giving us these very real examples of what it's like to grow up in a refugee camp. And congratulations for all you've accomplished and for dedicating your life to serving those who are most in need. Now I'm happy to introduce Donatella Parisi. After graduating...
Photos? Some few photos to show, please. Now, I would like to show for you the practical pictures that reflects my presentation and reflections. This name, Taban, as I mentioned earlier, is an Arabic word, which is here. I saw this picture in Juba, South Sudan, and I felt that, so I took it here. Ana Taban means I am tired because of war. Next, please. And this is the situation of how it means to be growing up as a child. You could see emptiness. Everything is empty, even up to inside. So that is how it is. That is the worldview for that particular child. And that was how my worldview was. I always feel connected when I see young children growing up. So whenever I see them, and I share my happiness with them. Next. Going to school is a priority. So for any refugee child, if you are there to support, it is very important. I am going to school, and my mother taught me that. Next. This is how, when I was trying to move around in the camps and trying to see the situation of what it means to be in a refugee camp. Many one tent to live in. Next. Listening to the stories of the marginalized people, vulnerable, is very important. We have to pay attention to them. They need us more. Next. I shared the same story that I shared with you today with the children, the internally displaced people, because they don't really make sense of the education they're going through. So despite of all the situation, it is clear that they can succeed. And these are the joy that I feel when someone is in a situation of helplessness, but still you're able to support a little by buying uniform, paying school fees for some of them. These are very important things that I take in heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taban. Okay, so now I will introduce Donatella Parisi. After graduating in law at Lewis University in Rome, she immediately started working within the international sector, which led her to Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Salvador. Having received a scholarship from the International Affairs Office of the Italian Red Cross, she specializes in international humanitarian law. She is currently the head of communications and external relations at Centro Estali, the Italian branch of the Jesuit Refugee Service. Grazie, Donatella.
Grazie a voi, buongiorno a tutti. Un grazie sincero ai colleghi.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to the colleagues of the JRS and to the USG for your invitation that you have addressed to the Centro Estali to be able to present the campaign that we have launched for the Refugee World Day 2020. We always try to make aware public opinion and society at large on the problem of refugees, because of course we know that those who are in charge of these who face these problems try to tell who refugees are, why do they come to Italy, and what are their stories. So the Centro Estali, on the occasion of the Refugee World Day, they have decided to launch the campaign. In anyone there is a trace of others. So towards a journey of a common experience. And this is quoting Pope Francis during his visit at the Centro Stanley, and which we have published in our annual report. So in each of one, there is a trace of, a quote from Primo Levi. Primo Levi has lived in a concentration camp during during the World War, and he believes that in any kind of relationship, whatever the conditions are, leaves a sign, leaves a mark. And we believe that this is true because when we think and we read the words of Primo Levi, this makes us think about refugees. He provides services in Rome and in the other Italian cities. There's always a mark which refugees leave. And also when Pope Francis tells us that we are all on the same boat and we cannot save each other individually, means that we are interconnected. We are all interconnected. Or as the women say in the Casa di Giorgia, which is a house where we welcome women refugees, and we are all intertwined. You see, intertwined like the threads of material. We can see these photos. These are the women, and they have sewn those face masks. At the House of Georgia, we have 30 women. Fatu, Demos, many. They come from Nigeria, from Somalia, from China, Eritrea. These women have crossed borders, desert, have crossed the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. Some of their friends and companions died over the sea or in the desert. They're victims of sexual abuse, of violence, of trafficking. But they teach us that hope never ends. When Pope says that they are hope fighters, and they truly are, because they fight daily. So at Casa di Giorgia, we have also Juliette. Juliette, she's 20. She's a young woman. She fled when she was young from Nigeria, from Boko Haram. She arrived in Italy, and she has been welcomed. She has a dream. The dream has a dream because she's still cultivating her dream, that is to be a seamstress. She wants to sew. And thanks to a project of the Centro Stanley, was able to do a formation training in February. And in the second day, in the lockdown was introduced, so she could no longer go to basically put into practice what she had learned. But she did not stop. She found a sewing machine, and she's sewing these little face masks that you can see. So this is a bit the idea, from her idea, that she wanted to share with all of us who lived with us for 2 months. She basically developed this campaign of the Centro Stanley. It's a social on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So all those who are following us, all those who know us, we ask to share a little sort of sign of solidarity. We are convinced that lockdown is not necessarily social distancing, but it's physical distancing, not psychological. So we who are accompanying refugees landing in Italy, we try to accompany all those who have lived this very strong experience, which is an experience of fear, of loneliness, which to some extent has also helped us to put ourselves in the shoes of a refugee. And this is when we have designed and conceived this campaign. It's a very simple one. We wanted to convey a positive message, a message of hope, but we wanted to show the world how much refugees can contribute with. She's 20. She's suffering a lot. She has certainly went through traumas, but she tries to turn this into an opportunity. And this is what they tell us, well, the ones that we welcome. One day we will be able to say thank you. Thank you to who helps, who welcomes them, and who accompanies them. And this thank you is what they tell us in advance on their trust. because basically society is welcoming refugees is responsibility to guarantee rights, duties, and to include and to welcome, because those as us and the large GRS family has the opportunity to share and to live this kind of experience knows that there's a lot of beauty in life. And so today, celebrating this Refugee World Day for us is celebrating the beauty of encounter. The beauty and the marvel of encounter has to be shared with the largest possible number of people, and this is what we do. We tend to do. So every time we launch a public campaign, we try to give voice to refugees who are the actors of our campaigns and who have more to say. And we hope that this kind of communication, which has been done, representation of refugees in Italy, in Europe, is their voice, the voice of refugees. So I was speaking about Juliette. Juliette is the girl who has given us the idea of the campaign of the Refugees World Day. I would like to listen to what she tells us, but which, to my opinion, is great importance, hoping that many can maybe listen. So I will listen. Kindly, we would watch now the video where she's going to greet us. Hello, my name is Juliette. I'm 20. I've been in Italy for 4 years. Last year, I started to take a course to become a seamstress. In March, I started a training, a stage, but unfortunately, I had to interrupt that because of the lockdown. But I thought I'm not going to stay hands in hand, and so what we did was starting to sew face masks, and that's how we launched this sort of activity, tailoring, and other girls helped me to sew the face masks. I hope to continue, and I hope to become an important and famous tailor. Bye. Hello. So Juliette knew about this morning, and she was very happy to share her message with you. So for us, this campaign has a meaning which goes beyond what we present on social networks that we're doing. These face masks are being produced by many refugees and many projects, JRS projects, and this is something which basically makes us feel as one single family. We are all together and we are all intertwined. We're all threaded if we want to think about fabric. So besides talking, we can think about solidarity, little gestures, hashtag, and maybe just send a little message and give voice to those who are voiceless. So this is the hashtag, Tracce Solidali at Centro Stalli. Everyone has something to say. They have a message to convey. They have things that they can teach. They're strong. They're determined. They do not surrender. They are young. They have a future, and they want to climb mountains, and they have all means to do it. So we are called simply to accompany them along this journey and to listen. We would like to try. We should do that and free our mind from all forms of preconception, prejudgment. This is truly topical in Italy because Italian society is undergoing a wave of fear of against refugees, and we can win this campaign if we can truly create spaces where refugees are no longer the beneficiaries of a service, but they can have a place. And thank you very much, and happy Refugee World Day.
Thank you, Donatella. This is a beautiful campaign, and that video really shows the good work that you are doing and the beauty of encounter. So thank you. Our final speaker is Father Thomas Smollett, who has been the International Director of the Jesuit Refugee Service since October 2015. A native of Sacramento, California, he was ordained a Jesuit priest in 1986. His ministry has focused on community development, and in 1999, he was named Provincial of the California Province Jesuits for a 6-year term. From 2006 until 2014, he served as the president of the Jesuit Conference of the United States, coordinating the national and international projects of the USA Jesuit provinces. He also worked with JRS in Masisi, Democratic Republic of Congo during 2015. Father Tom, screen is yours.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for this opportunity to be with all of you today. Thank you for being part of our celebration of World Refugee Day. Especially want to thank our speakers. Carolina, thank you for reminding us that this is an issue of protection, that the vulnerable among us need safety and need to be protected so that they can move forward. Sister Carmen, thank you for telling us the story of JRS Greece and for especially reminding us. I was really struck by your comment about so many people on the streets suffering from drug addiction and poverty. Refugees are people. I spoke to one refugee years ago who was in Belgium at that point, and she said, "I'm tired of being called a refugee. I'm a human being." Taban, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for reminding us that the lives of forcibly displaced people have a direction. People have hope, can move forward. And Donatella, thank you for reminding us of the campaign that Centro Stale is doing now, but the several campaigns that Centro has done to make sure that the sense of the bellezza dell'incontro can always be part of the conversation here in Italy and in our world. As I reflect a bit on World Refugee Day, and as I reflect on what is going on in these moments, I think it's important for us to realize that this is ultimately a spiritual moment, that God is very much with us in this challenging time. And I'd like to share with you what I think is a distraction and a temptation, and how we might be able to go deeper to move forward in bringing God's reign even more present in this challenging moment. The pictures you are seeing right now are pictures of JRS folks and the people we serve involved in COVID responses of many types. But I want to say that COVID can be a distraction. Yes, we need to serve. Yes, we need to respond. But COVID doesn't change the reality of our world, of 80 million forcibly displaced people, of great injustices among people of color, among people of different classes and societies. COVID, in a sense, has ripped off the bandage, that Band-Aid, which might have covered it up. We need to respond to COVID, but always keep in mind the value, the grace, the hope that our forcibly displaced sisters and brothers bring and offer and hope for in their own lives. COVID is important, but the deeper realities are still there. That was the distraction. Let me just add a temptation. You probably heard, as was said at the beginning, that the latest statistics of forcibly displaced people were released this week by UNHCR. 79.5 million people, of whom almost 60% are internally displaced in their own countries. There is a great temptation, I think, to be overwhelmed by that number, to throw up our hands and say, what can we do? Yes, it's almost 80 million people. But that 80 million people is less than 1% of our world. What if the other 99% of us could do one thing? There is no refugee crisis. There's a crisis of administration. There's a crisis of shared resources. We can make a difference. And how do we do that? Again, that number can seem overwhelming, but it begins by doing one thing. By accompanying the people asking for food in Australia. The women that Sister Carmen spoke about, Taban and others who have been through his story. It's doing one thing, walking with people, and finding the face of Jesus with them. Yes, there are distractions on this road. Yes, there are temptations to discouragement. Let us be grateful for what has brought us together. Let us pray and work together to accompany, serve, and advocate with those who are forcibly displaced. And let us go forward this day from this event that we have shared, committed once more to do one thing. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Father Tom. Thank you for sharing also our campaign to do one thing, not just during World Refugee Day, but all the time. So now we will open up the question and answer. So Patrizia, tu vuoi?
I mean, thank you, Maria. I think we might ask so many things. You know, it was really moving to listen the different experiences. I saw a couple of, there are a lot of comments, and I would like to invite the speakers to read the comments because they are mainly for them. And I saw a couple of questions, but, you know, just as a final word for the speakers, the three speakers, you know. And one came from Sister Yolanda asking what kind of community we need to welcome and to be open. It was much referred to Sister Carmen reflection. I saw another one, but it was very at the beginning. Yeah, I think it's okay because there was one at the very beginning, and we have just a few minutes, Maria, so we can leave just a final word, 1 minute to our first three speakers, and then we leave the word to Sister Pat for the conclusion, let's say. We can follow the same order as before, if you agree. So we can leave Carolina first, Carmen second, and Tamban as a third, just like a final word. Is that okay, Maria?
Sounds great.
Carolina, could you please open? Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good question. When thinking about what kind of community we need and what kind of welcome we need, I believe that we need a community that sees others, and especially refugees and forcibly displaced people, as their brothers and sisters, not as strangers, but that treats them with that sort of dignity that you will treat someone that is very close to you, like your brother or your sister, and not like someone that is that is a stranger to you. I think we need to get over those barriers that think about us and them, and it needs to be all in this together. And this is exactly what Pope Francis is saying to us, that's how he's saying that we are all in the same boat, and that somehow COVID-19 and that kind of uncertainty and that kind of not inability to control the future and all of this fear that we have all somehow experienced can teach us how others feel, and we can learn from this experience to be that sort of welcoming community towards others the way we wanted it to be with ourselves. So I would see it like that, and I will go back to the birds that Pope Francis has told us so many times, to the welcome, protect, promote, and integrate, because I think those birds contain themselves the kind of practical actions that Taban was speaking about that will make us all a welcoming community. And doesn't stop with welcome, it needs to go beyond into protection, protecting the rights of people, promoting them as the human beings that they are, and integration is a deep word. Integration means that we all become the same and we all have access to the same sort of rights and to the same sort of community, and there is not that difference. So it goes much farther than only welcoming, I think, and those four verbs are a big help for us coming from Pope Francis.
Saltamos al español. Yo quisiera...
I think that, well, I would like to answer this question using a word that everybody knows, and especially for Taban, Ubuntu. I think that we need a community where we all respect each other and we are one. And what's happening to me is happening to somebody else, and somebody else's problems are my problems as well. They matter to me too. So it's an evangelical community. It's the message that Jesus gave us, his blessings. And it's a simple message reminded us by the Pope itself. So it's about people. There are people, they're human beings. We are human beings. We are brothers and sisters. Thank you very much.
Yeah, in my part, I'm so glad to be part of this program and having shared what it means to be human beings. What I could say is that what kind of community do we need? You know, there are quite a number of communities, but if we take in heart human dignity, that is what matters. And once we know that we share the same dignity of human persons, and then there will be a call to realize that actually we can cooperate in order to elevate and to bring people together from different kind of experiences that they go through. And that is very important because sometimes we live in different contexts, and this context, one context cannot know the other context. But the moment that we're able to get united and to cooperate and looking at the perspective of every context and cooperating in contributing and doing something great in order to keep respecting human dignity, that is something very, very important to me. Thank you so much.
Maria, just a note from the chat. Some people are asking if we can share the testimonies of our speakers. So if they allow us to do it, we will do it on the both website, usg.org and GSR.
Yes, I've already reached, yes. Let's see with the speakers if we can share, and then sounds good.
Maria, I think we can conclude giving the word to Sister Pat. You can introduce her.
Yes. So Sister Pat Murray of UISG IBVM will do the closing for today's presentation. Over to you, Sister Pat.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm speaking to you as the Executive Secretary of the UISG, and it's my great honour and privilege to thank all our speakers today: Carolina, Sister Carmen, Taban, Father Tom, and Donatella. But particularly, I think, to say how important I think this initiative between UISG and JRS is. As we know, there are many religious sisters working as part of JRS, but there are many other congregations who are supporting the work of JRS. And I think this is part of the ways in which we form community, by actually reaching across our organizations, as individuals and also as groups, to create the sense of walking alongside one another as the human community. We need each other, as we've heard. And in the context of World Refugee Day and our presentations this morning, our hearts have been touched. Our minds have been touched, in the sense we've been given such powerful analysis, but we've been given such personal testimonies. And I have here in front of me some of the words that really struck me as we listened this morning. You know, things we can do ourselves as individuals: listen, encounter, be in solidarity, respect the dignity, nurture hope, confront our own fears and our own xenophobia, engage in practical action, be advocates, accompany, listen, be close to, create spaces. And I think I will leave us with Father Tom's call at the end to begin by doing one thing. And I think we could go from today's webinar by doing the one thing of sharing this presentation with at least one other person. By perhaps, in sharing the presentation, to have a conversation with one other person about how we as part of the human community need to walk alongside our brothers and sisters who are migrants, refugees, or displaced, not out of a sense of charity and reaching out to them, but because we need them to open us to our own humanity. And in a sense, COVID-19 has closed some of us, closed our minds and hearts, has made us fearful, we've been in a sense of retreat. And I think now is the time as we step out and we walk together in order to create this new way of being a family, a human family, where hope flourishes, where the dreams of one another can be nurtured, and when we walk together as brothers and sisters. So my grateful thanks to JRS for the extraordinary work that you do worldwide. And we are, as UISG, glad to be one of your collaborators, and we look forward to nurturing that more in the future. God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you, Sister Pat, for that beautiful closing, and we are so happy to have you as partners as well. Thank you to all the speakers again. Thank you to everyone for tuning in at all different times. And we will be sharing, as Patrizia said, on both of our websites, the presentations from today. And we encourage and invite you to do one thing, to stay connected. And thank you. Thank you so much for attending today. Patrizia, vuoi dire qualcosa?
Oh, I think it's okay. Thank you. Thank you to our interpreters, to our speakers. So thank you very much for participating. Thank you to my colleague, Sister Florence, who helped with the technical side. So have a nice day to all, and World Refugee Day. Good to all.
God bless you.
World Refugee Day.